make of that verdict and how you feel about it?
Well, I think it's the right verdict. I feel very satisfied that the jury was able to look at all the evidence and appreciate that mental illness can be a very important factor.
Bob, did your client felt awful after this was done? What else did he say to you?
Mr. Kachkar feels terrible about what happened. And Mr. Kachkar has specifically told me that the focus today should be on Sergeant Russell and his family, and not him.
Does he understand what he's done, and does he understand he's going to a psychiatric facility?
Yes, he understands he's going to a psychiatric facility. He understands what happened, and he has repeatedly, since his arrest, told everyone that he doesn't understand how it happened or why it happened. And the reason that he doesn't understand how or why it happened is because the three of the best forensics psychiatrists in Canada have diagnosed him as being psychotic at the time and suffering from a major mental illness. And so he couldn't possibly be expected to understand how that happened. And hopefully over time he will come to understand and get better.
Sir, what would you say to, a lot of people are saying today that this was a police officer killed in the line of duty and there's no justice here. How would you respond to that?
Well, I would respond by saying that that's a very simplistic point of view. There was justice done today. A man who was very mentally ill at the time and didn't know what he was doing caused someone's death, and everybody feels bad about that. But that's why we have provisions in the criminal code so that people who are mentally ill and mentally disturbed to the extent that they can't bring their mind to focus on what they're doing, we don't punish them. We don't treat them the same way as we do other people who have the capacity to rationally decide what they're going to do. If someone is in a state of mind where they have no longer able to make an informed decision, they don't have the capacity to decide whether to do something or not do something, then we treat them differently. So I think justice was done today.
What do you think will happen to him now?
Earlier on, we talked about the fact that prison was the wrong place for Mr. Kachkar. Can you explain that to us?
Well, I mean, prison is the wrong place for Mr. Kachkar because Mr. Kachkar's he's not been found guilty of anything. So I think it's important.
In his mental state,
yeah,
in that sense. I
think it's important to remember that he's not been convicted or found guilty of anything, and what he needs and what he will receive is treatment, and he's not going to. If he were to go to the penitentiary or the prison, he would not get any treatment. He would sit in a room, and that's what would happen. I mean, but the main point is that he will be getting the treatment that he needs. But also, it's very, very important to remember he has not been found guilty of anything. He has not been convicted of this offense. The jury heard all of the evidence and they decided that at the time that the offense occurred, Mr. Kachkar was not in his right mind.
Bob, you have no objection to the victim impact statements. Do you think it was appropriate for that to happen today, this close to the verdict being delivered?
Well, I think it was important for the family of Sergeant Russell to express their feelings. It's impossible to even imagine how they feel and how terrible they feel and how sad they are and what a tragedy this is for them. And they've been living with this for 2 years, and look, if anything can help them get over what's happened and move on, and if that assists them, then I don't have a problem with it. I'm happy they did it.
Throughout the trial, Mr. Kachkar has stared straight ahead. Given the appearance of someone who's unable to appreciate what's going on, has he been able to appreciate what's been going on in the trial?
I think he's been able to appreciate what's going on in the trial. I think we have to remember, everybody has to remember that people who suffer from a major mental illness, it can be fluctuating, and it's in degrees, and someone can be very, very ill one day and not be so ill the next day, and some days are better than others, and they can understand. But Mr. Kachkar certainly understood what was going on in the trial, and but you know, he has, like everybody else, he has good days and bad days. But he, you know, I just think there's a misconception, a popular misconception perhaps, that someone who is seriously ill must always look and act and sound and appear seriously ill, but that's not the way it works. And we see it time and time again that someone is worse at certain times in their life, and terrible things happen, not because they want them to, but because they don't understand what's going on. And in Mr. Kachkar's case, the jury decided that at the time he was psychotic, and psychotic means that one is not operating in the real world. They're responding to delusions and voices and various things that we can't comprehend.
So, what happens next for?
This is a guy who didn't have a long history of mental illness and a long record. What was it like for you to defend someone who just kind of had this kind of thing happen in just the way it did?
I don't understand the question. What was it like for me?
This is someone who had a long history of mental illness and had gone through the institutional systems, through the shelter systems. This is someone who had a life, and a career and a family, and by all accounts, 5-7 years ago was living the same kind of a life that the victim was, and then he ends up on the skids, a transient in the shelter system. But how did that impact your defense?
Well, it made the defense more obvious because all of those things happened because he was mentally ill. And the fact that he hadn't been diagnosed in the past is unfortunate, but there are a lot of people who fly under the radar, you know. Not everyone who is schizophrenic and not everyone who has a major mental illness is always walking around listening, talking to themselves and screaming and yelling a lot of the times. And that's what a lot of the doctors said here, is that these kinds of illnesses can vary in the degree of intensity. And sometimes when it's not so intense, the people who are suffering from the illness can control it. They can manage it. They cannot respond to the voices. When it becomes acute, then the illness takes over, and that's what happened to Mr. Kachkar. So all of those things that you refer to, the fact that his life went downhill, the functional decline in someone's life is evidence of mental illness. As one of the doctors testified to, Dr. Ramchow, said people don't go from having a family, a good job, and everything, and suddenly wind up in a shelter and homeless on the street with nothing, without there being a reason for it. And in this case, the reason was mental illness.
Does he have the capacity to feel relief? Was he frightened at all about the prospect of prison?
I think anybody is frightened at the prospect of prison. I think Mr. Kachkar certainly was concerned about what was going to happen to him. But I can tell you, Mr. Kachkar's concern for the 2 years that I've dealt with him has repeatedly been for the family of Sergeant Russell. And he said that from day one, as soon as he woke up in the hospital, and he has said it for the last 2 years. And so he feels terrible about that. But yeah, he was concerned about that, but his focus was more on the family.
What are the next steps for Mr. Kachkar?
Well, the next steps for Mr. Kachkar are there will be the judge has ordered that there be a hearing before the Ontario Review Board, which has jurisdiction over people that are found not criminally responsible. the review board will hold that hearing, and then they'll determine what hospital he goes to and what the conditions are, and then eventually over time, that's an annual process, and every year they'll review his situation again, and they'll see how he's doing. They'll get the input from the doctors, and we'll see how it goes.
So what do you say to critics who say this is a get out of jail free card?
I say they don't know what they're talking about. I think before people criticize something, they should take the time to perhaps try and understand it. It's not a get out of jail free card. It's a recognition that someone is very, very sick and needs to be treated, and they don't get out of. They don't go to jail because they haven't done anything wrong in terms of the criminal justice system. A bad thing has happened, but they're not criminally responsible. It doesn't mean that they're not accountable. He's accountable because he's going into the hospital system. It's different, and it's not a get out of jail free card. I mean, that was some of the concerns was, maybe people can pretend to be mentally ill and get away with something, but you can't fake your past. You can't say somebody is pretending to be mentally ill when you can look back at what they've been doing for the last 15 years and see that they've been mentally ill. So people who have that attitude, I say to them, you're wrong, and maybe take a little time and think about what you're saying and look into the issues before you comment like that.
Do you have any sense of how long he may be before he's released?
No, that's I can't even. Sometimes people are there for years and years and years, and sometimes if they respond quickly, they cascade down the system. But the review board is very responsible. I mean, people think that this is some sort of a cakewalk. It's not. The review board's primary focus is the protection of the public, and so they're not going to let. They have to make sure before they even relieve the conditions a little bit and give them a little more freedom that the public is not at risk, and that's their focus, and so I don't think anybody needs to be concerned about that.
So within 30 days he'll go before the Ontario Review Board.
Within 45 days, yeah.
Within 45 days, and then every year after that,
yes,
he'll have a review.
Yeah, that's right.
And sort of he'll be in a sense a hostage or a patient of the Ontario mental health system.
Yeah, and he's under the jurisdiction of the board. The board decides where he goes, what conditions he goes under, and the doctors in the hospital decide what treatment he should get. And then
within 45 days, he'll have an assessment, and they'll determine whether he goes to a secure facility such as Oak Ridge's Penetang, or he goes to Whitby or.
Yeah, they'll decide the appropriate place for him to go.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Bob.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.